Hey there movie lovers, welcome back to Rocky Watches Movies. Today we're blasting off into the world of the 1984 sci-fi adventure, The Last Starfighter. This cult favourite combined classic coming-of-age storytelling with groundbreaking visual effects that were truly ahead of their time. But how much do you really know about what went on behind the scenes? So lock onto your target and prepare for launch as we explore 20 things you never knew about The Last Starfighter. Writer Jonathan Betuel explained that the idea for the film originated when he wandered into a video arcade and saw a young boy playing a game. At the time, he was reading The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which led him to imagine a video game as a modern-day Sword in the Stone, where achieving an extraordinary high score could trigger consequences far beyond Earth, rippling across the universe. The characters of Alex and Maggie were originally named Skip and Penny, but director Nick Castle felt the names were too cartoonish and opted to change them. Alex was later named after writer Jonathan Betuel's son, while his brother Lewis took his name from Castle's son. Castle also revealed that Maggie was named after producer Gary Andelson's wife, who appears in the film briefly as the first Rylan Alex encounters at Starfighter Command. In the first draft of The Last Starfighter screenplay, writer Jonathan Betuel portrayed Alex and Maggie, then named Skip and Penny, as typical suburban teenagers of the 1980s, reflecting a familiar trend in cinema at the time. However, director Nick Castle felt this approach was too reminiscent of the style popularised by Steven Spielberg, particularly in films like Poltergeist and E.T., and believed it risked feeling overly derivative. Instead, Castle pushed for a setting that felt more contained and slightly run down, giving the story a stronger sense of realism. This led to the creation of the Starbright Trailer Court, a location intended to feel both isolated and authentic. Castle later described it as a place that was isolated but charming and wholesome and real Americana. The film was directed by Nick Castle, who famously portrayed the original Mike Myers in Halloween. Having studied with John Carpenter at USC, Castle later visited the set of Halloween while it was filming nearby. Carpenter put him to work by handing him a mask and overalls, casting him as the silent, menacing Shape, a performance that would go on to define one of cinema's earliest and most iconic slasher villains. That's not the only Halloween connection. Before landing the role of Alex Rogan, Lance Guest had only 2 big screen credits to his name. One of these was a supporting role in Halloween 2, which was produced by John Carpenter. As Guest later recalled, The Last Starfighter was in pre-production at the same time Carpenter was overseeing edits on Halloween 2. And when director Nick Castle saw Guest in footage that Carpenter showed him, he knew he had found his star. The beta unit is the android double created to replace Alex Rogan on Earth after he is taken into space. Ill-equipped to convincingly imitate human behaviour, Beta becomes a major source of the film's humour, and proved so popular with test audiences that the cast and crew were brought back to expand its role. These reshoots represented a few challenges. Lance Guest had since had his hair cut, requiring him to wear a noticeably voluminous wig to match his earlier appearance. The situation was further complicated when he fell ill during filming, necessitating heavy makeup to even out his skin tone. One particularly unsettling moment is the torture of a captured Starleague spy, with the disturbing scene being broadcast to Starfighter Command and to a visibly horrified Alex Rogan. In its original form, the sequence was far more graphic. The torture device was a laser that slowly melted the spy's head, beginning at the top of his skull and continuing until it was completely destroyed. However, the final cut drastically reduced the scene's intensity, ending it after just a few seconds as the spy's forehead begins to glow red, leaving the full extent of his fate implied rather than shown. Director Nick Castle later remarked that the moment was deemed too gruesome to include in full, leading to its removal. The Last Starfighter was one of the earliest films to make extensive use of CGI for its special effects. Instead of relying on physical models, the production used 3D rendered designs to bring its spacecraft and other elements to life. The Gunstar and many of the film's ships were designed by artist Ron Cobb, whose previous work included Dark Star, Alien, Star Wars, and Conan the Barbarian. Tron helped pioneer the use of CGI in 1982, but The Last Starfighter marked a significant leap forward for the technology. To create its detailed environments and action sequences, the filmmakers relied on the Cray XMP, then the fastest computer in the world. Digital Productions, the company behind the film's visual effects, became the first commercial organisation to acquire the 5.25-ton machine, which operated at such extraordinary speeds that it required liquid cooling. All of these visual effects cost approximately $3 million for 25 minutes of CGI, equating to around $2,000 per second of footage. Robert Preston was a seasoned stage and film actor, with credits including Victor Victoria and How the West Was Won. But he remains best known for his starring role as the charismatic conman Harold Hill in 1962's The Music Man. It was this performance that inspired screenwriter Batuel to suggest him for the role of Centauri, the cunning alien responsible for the video game that draws Alex Rogan into an interstellar conflict. Once Preston was cast, the character was reshaped to more closely reflect his The Music Man persona. The star car driven by Centauri is based on a DeLorean, featuring its distinctive gull-wing doors and stainless steel body. Just a year later, the DeLorean would become iconic following its appearance in Back to the Future. Funnily enough, the star car went on to make a cameo appearance in Back to the Future Part 2 in 1989. This is not that surprising, as Ron Cobb worked on this film and Back to the Future, helping to design the time machine. Ron Cobb came up with the idea of giving the Rylans bald heads with white hair, suggesting it reflected their wisdom. He designed them to appear lighter and more heroic, with a vaguely cat-like look and fuller hair at the sides of their heads. The small, box-shaped robot seen after Alex Rogan receives his uniform on Rylos is a Heathkit Hero 1, short for Heathkit Educational Robot. Sold as a kit requiring extensive assembly for $1,500, a fully assembled version was also available for $2,500. Not something every kid could put on his Christmas list. 3 years before joining the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation as Wesley Crusher, Wil Wheaton received one of his earliest big screen credits in this film, where he was listed as Lewis's friend. Although he filmed several lines of dialogue, his scenes were ultimately cut, leaving him as little more than a background presence at the Starlight Starbright trailer court. Despite its growing fan base, The Last Starfighter never received a sequel, not for the lack of trying. Director Nick Castle developed a follow-up around 2005, and another attempt surfaced in 2008, but both fell through. Later projects, including The Starfighter Chronicles and a proposed sequel titled The Last Starfighters, also stalled. The main obstacle has been a complicated rights issue, with Steven Spielberg even unable to secure them. For years, screenwriter Jonathan Batuel believed Universal owned the property, only to discover the studio's rights had expired. After several years of legal wrangling, Jonathan ultimately secured the domestic distribution rights to the film, putting him in control of any potential sequels or remakes. According to newspaper reports from 1984, audiences leaving test screenings of The Last Starfighter were so inspired that many headed straight to their local arcades, eager to try the game featured in the film. Nick Castle recalled that viewers actively searched for the machine, convinced it actually existed and keen to play it for themselves. In reality, a Last Starfighter game was in development at Atari, but it never made it to market. Designed as a first-person shooter with mechanics similar to the company's Star Wars game, it ultimately fell victim to being a too risky project. A planned 8-bit home version was also scrapped, though the work was not entirely wasted, as elements were later reworked into Solaris and Star Raiders 2, both released in 1986. In the year of the film's release, Marvel Comics published a comic book adaptation in Marvel Super Special 31. Written by Bill Mantlo and artwork by Brett Blevins and Tony Sammons, the adaptation was also issued as a 3-part limited series. If you do want the story to continue, you may be in luck. Volume 1 of a new graphic novel is available to pre-order from Mad Cave. It is a sequel to the film and, according to their website, picks up from the end credits. A musical adaptation of The Last Starfighter was first staged in October 2004 at the Storm Theatre off-Broadway in New York City. The production featured music and lyrics by Skip Kennan, bringing a theatrical spin to the film's sci-fi adventure by blending its story with original songs and stage performances. In 1984, a sci-fi tabletop game was released, The Last Starfighter Tunnel Chase, a board game inspired by the film that allowed players to recreate its space combat action in a strategic tabletop format. The last player alive wins. And there you have it, folks. You now know a little bit more about The Last Starfighter. If you enjoyed the video, which I presume you did as you got this far, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos coming to Rocky Watches Movies. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.